Well, it's 8 o'clock in the United Kingdom on Wednesday, the 22nd of September. We are one day into the autumn, counting from the autumnal equinox, which also was International Gratitude Day. There's so much that we have as entrepreneurs to be grateful for. And I think it's more important to be grateful for the small, insignificant things that were actually our building block to getting to where we are now. That we need to be able to be grateful for all of those things as well as the big ones that have come along the way. Realizing that the universe has provided as we put out effort and intention and energy. I think one of the massive issues that happen for entrepreneurs and is that we oftentimes wonder in the beginning, is this the right time for me to start? We might get the bug to do something, but we sit back and say, how do I balance time-wise with family, my current job, maybe educational pursuits, maybe social engagements? How do I balance all that out? Maybe it's not perfect time for me right now. Sometimes it's, well, it's going to cost X amount to do this, and it's going to cost X amount to do that. And I only have Y amount right now, and Z is the family's expenses, which seem to strip out Y, which is why I was thinking about X, trying to get some kind of a business going, but I don't see how that's possible. And, back in the 80s, early 90s, I lucked into several men who were very successful in Amway. And they were all in this line with this guy named Dexter Yeager. And I don't remember the guy's name. There was some guy named Wilson, and then there was a guy named Randy Haugen, and there was a guy named John Sims. And I knew these people. And I was a psychologist in my background. And a lot of times they came to talk to me about people. They weren't incredibly gifted in many regards, but they had a belief in themselves. They had a drive. They had gone past that point where they were really concerned what other people might think about them because they were so driven by their why. And one time, one of these gentlemen by the name of Randy Haugen came to me and he said, I don't know what's going on. He says, we get all these people into Amway and they're all excited and they all want to be involved. But about half of them take like the first 2-3 weeks making shelves in their garages or in their house to store all these products that will be collected by people or whatever they were doing at that time in Amway. And they haven't sold anything to anybody. They haven't brought anybody into the fold, but they're getting their shelves in order. And I just pointed out, I said, it's because they're trying to build belief. They have a dream. They're trying to build belief, but they don't have a why yet. They don't have a why they're doing this. They have greed, but they don't have a why. And greed and why are really interchangeable items for most people. Anyways, he appreciated that. But what became a theme for Randy and people like John Sims and other people who were working in that line was start where you are right now. You have a dream, you have desire, you are emotionally energized to do this thing. So start right now where you are. Don't worry about getting shelves together. Put together every person you know on a list and contact them, call them all. Ask them if you can talk to them. Share what you want to do. And by going into that route, Randy was saying that he had a big thing in Texas where he just gave that as the theme for like 6 or 7 different regional meetings that he was attending that were his people, what they called their downline. And he said, do you know, he said at the end of the month, those people brought in over 50,000 new people. He says, I've got to get that message out to everywhere. But another thing that's kind of happened recently, I was just reminded that The Sound of Music, the wonderful musical from the 1960s with Julie Andrews and Christopher Plummer, premiered this last week in worldwide. And how many of you have watched that movie, sang along with it? I must have been 9 years old when it came out. And I remember sitting down watching the movie, and the first few minutes astounded me because it's just the Alps and the wind blowing through the Alps. I could have that movie for breakfast every morning. It's just how majestic that all is. But there's a part in the movie where these children ask the nanny if she would teach them how to sing, because they notice that she knows how to sing. And she starts off, she says, well, let's start at the very beginning. The beginning is a very good place to start. When you begin to read, you start with A, B, C. When you sing, you begin with Do, Re, Mi. And she kind of goes along with this little bit of preamble and then also says, okay, I'll make it easier. And she starts singing Do, Re, Mi, Do, dear. Well, I'm 9 years old. I've not really seen much of the world. In fact, I've been in poverty, and this is like the 3rd movie in a theater I've ever been to. And this is the nicest movie theater I have ever seen. It was the first building I ever been in where there was an actual chandelier hanging down. And I just remembered how I was so amazed by the chandelier. And so here I am, I'm in this movie theater, and all of a sudden I start hearing people in the audience singing along with the song. I don't know the words. They're not putting words on the screen, but everybody in this theater is pretty soon, they're all singing the movie, the song in this movie. Do, a deer, a female deer. Ray, a drop of golden sun. Me, a name I call myself. Fa, a long, long way to run. So, a needle pulling thread. La, a note that follows so. Tea, a drink with jam and bread, and that brings us back to dough. And these people were, they couldn't have seen the movie before because it was just premiering. It was like brand new. It's just out in the theaters. Now, they could have gone a day or two before me, but back in those days, I mean, it was just a huge event to get into the theater. And I was just amazed listening to all these people. Must have been 2,000-3,000 people in the theater. All, well, not all of them, because I wasn't, because I didn't know the words. I never heard the song before, but they all knew, and they were all singing along and having a great time. And there's so much truth to song. Always start in the beginning, and wherever your beginning is, that's a great place to start. That's where you need to start. That's where you need to begin. It would be great if you could start a business with a few million of your own, and you can hire the right people and have the right resources so that you can put things into a business and make it happen. and buy the right advertising. And then you don't have to take the years of doing something organically. But we're not there. Most of us aren't there. In fact, most people I know who came online into the digital universe didn't even have much of a digital skill set. They had to learn it along the way. They might have had a few thousand, maybe tens of thousands available to them. But a lot of people were living from paycheck to paycheck, and they were really sacrificing to get this thing going. And when they began, they were probably using old beat up laptops. They were buying used equipment to make things work, or they were getting the least expensive items so that they could begin. We all been there. Most everybody's been there. But they're always sitting back saying, oh, I wish I had something better. I wish I had something better. But the difference between them and the people who are waiting for something better first was the people who are waiting for something better first hadn't begun. They hadn't started. They hadn't put out a message to the universe. The message to the universe is, I'm doing this thing. I am putting my intention and my effort forward. And I'm doing it with gratitude and with thanksgiving, because I know that there is someone who is going to be interested in what I have to share. And if there's one in a world with close to 8 trillion people, trillion, why did I say trillion? 8 billion people, there's got to be at least 50,000 who are just like that one person. And that would be a very, 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 very tiny cohort of people on this planet. Think of all the really weird and strange ideas that you've heard of, or groups that people belong to. You know, it always starts off with 1 or 2 people who kind of get together and say, this is how we think. And they start talking about it. I'm old enough to remember when there was a UFO group in Arizona back in the 1970s. I think I just came home from military service. A friend of mine told me about this group. He says they're a bunch of wackos. Well, I was looking for wackos, I guess, because I decided to find them, and I went. And, you know, in that meeting, there must have been about 20 people in there. And of those 20, there must have been maybe 8 who were like true believers. And they were talking about various events, etc., that had happened. Now, this is in the 70s. And one of those people was this guy, Walton, the guy that had been abducted from the Payson, Arizona area, which was not very far from where I was a cowboy. Now, I didn't know him, but I didn't even know about his event. But here he was talking about what it was like to have been abducted. And it was like the most surreal 45 minutes of hearing this guy's story and him answering a few questions. And, you know, and then this kind of like UFO meeting kind of folded up, and people were just standing around talking. And, you know, people were trying to see if you wanted to join the group or whatever else. And I knew I had other things in my life, and I was going to be leaving shortly. There was no sense in joining the group. It was interesting to be there. But you see, that group at one time may have only had 1 or 2 people. And they just maybe talked on the phone. And then they found a 3rd person, and they might have met at a coffee shop. But you see how things grow. Things grow organically. Now that group is now part of the MUFON network. Millions of people belong to MUFON. They are all over the world. They hold major conferences across the planet. People pay thousands to attend a MUFON conference. People come with thousands to buy books and pamphlets and videotapes and eyewitness testimonies, etc. So where you start is where you are today. And when you get going, you don't have everything you want. It's an uncomfortable position to be in. You just have a big why, and that why is pushing you forward. You know what you want. The want is really clear. You've already figured that one out, and you have a huge why. And you have that sense of gratitude because you know your why and you know what you want. Now, you may not know how to get it, and that doesn't matter. You may not know anything. You may not understand divine principles or laws. You may not even know what product it is that you want to be involved with, or type of service that you want to provide. You just know what you want, and you just know why it has to happen. It is huge. It hurts you. It makes you cry if you don't do something about your why. It's that powerful to you. And it's kind of like, I like Harry Potter. I like the Harry Potter books. I like old Dumbledore. And for those of you who've never seen a Harry Potter movie or read the books or anything, Dumbledore is this wizard who's the headmaster at this school called Hogwarts, where young wizards come to be trained on the magical world. And Dumbledore is talking to Harry Potter one day, and he said, "Help will always be given at Hogwarts to those who ask it." That is so true. You don't know how to do something? Ask. If you don't know what technology you need, ask. If you don't know what programs you need to operate in the digital sphere, ask. If you're not sure what's a good camera in your budget range to do something online, ask. Help will always be given to those who ask. The first thing that really struck me when I came into the digital realm was, number one, the total ignorance I had about being here. I knew how to turn on a computer. I knew how to type an email. And if something went wrong at my old job, I knew how to call IT and have them come fix it. When I got here, I had to ask so many questions. And I was lucky because I was able to find a tribe of people who were in the digital sphere, some of them just 2-3 days ahead of me. And they had the answer to the question I was asking. And they felt really good that they could help. And the help was free. There was no charge for it. And then as I developed further, there were people who were much further along the way. And some of them would say, this is a pitfall, avoid that. This is a step forward. This is a program I found that helps, and it's free. I bought one time, and then I discovered this free one, and the free one is actually better than the one I bought. So, go with the free one. And the universe is there. In this universe that we live in this world, in this digital environment, help is always given to those who ask it. And this is like going back to Randy Haugen. Why are these people building these shelves? They don't even have people that they're selling to yet. Because they didn't know how to ask, or they were afraid to ask. They didn't want to look stupid. And so they did something that kept them busy. It wasn't productive. It wasn't moving them closer to their goals, but at least they felt like they were doing something. And what everybody needs is a mentor. What everybody needs is somebody who's just a little bit down the road. You know, when I was a young psychologist, you always find mentors, but usually, you know, my idea of a mentor was somebody who had 10, 15 years of experience. They had worked, you know, specific caseloads. They had taken on a lot of different challenges. Oftentimes they were like adjunct professors at different schools or universities. And they were willing to supervise you and to, you know, meet with you and talk about a case that you might be there. They were giving you a bit of little supervision, but it was friendly. It wasn't, you know, a compensated scheme. They liked you, they believed in you, they wanted to give a little bit of themselves to help you become better and to move along the learning curve more quickly. And I'll always be grateful to the mentors I had. But when I came into the digital world, I discovered that a mentor is somebody who knows the answer and is willing to share it with you. And so allow yourself to be mentored by people who can take you to where they're at. And then be grateful for what they've done and thank them. And then share that information to somebody else. But at the same time, your next question can't be answered by that guy. He doesn't know. Find the next mentor, somebody who knows that answer and is willing to help you. And so we go back to the song, you know, doe a deer, a female deer. I didn't know the words, but I watched the movie. I heard the people singing. I liked what I was hearing. The song plays a couple times in the movies, even at the very end when they're in the big theaters, the Von Trapp family, they kind of singing the song. But by the time they get there, I kind of have some of the words, like, you know, it's doe a deer, a female deer, ray a drop upon the sun. You know, you kind of started getting it. Now I saw the movie maybe 5, 6 times by the time I was into my 20s and I had my own family. And we're driving down the road and, you know, kids are bored, you know, and so you have little car games as you're driving long distances, as you do in North America oftentimes. And I remember one time I started singing the song. And I was amazed that my 2 older children knew the song and they joined in. And by that time, we had gone maybe 30 minutes. Every individual in the family was singing. Everybody knew the song, and we were singing it over and over and over. And we were singing it as a round, front seat, back seat, kind of a thing, you know, singing it back and forth, and just having a grand time. You know, there's so many gifts, but you have to start where you're at today. You just have to go forward. You just can't have a perfect beginning. It'd be wonderful if you always had a perfect beginning. It would be wonderful that when you walked into school, you already knew how to read and you didn't have to stumble over the letters and try to make the sounds that belong to the letter to make the word. It'd be just wonderful if you could just pick up a piece of paper and just read it. Same thing with mathematics. You know, you have to learn to write the numbers. Then you have to understand what this sign means and that sign means, and then what you're supposed to do with those numbers when you have that sign. And eventually you're able to add, subtract, multiply, divide, and then they start getting really fancy by giving you things called square roots and how to factor and how to, foil a calculation, etc. They do all of this fancy schmancy stuff, but the basics are all the same. And everybody has to start off wherever you are in the process with getting the job done. When I was a member of the military, I had a friend of mine who wanted to be a jet aircraft mechanic. He went into the Air Force and he said, on the very first day, the instructor stood up and said, "This is a wrench. This kind of a wrench is called a crescent wrench. And this is what you do with that wrench." And then he picked up another wrench. He says, "This is a wrench. It's called a socket wrench. And on the socket wrench, you have this piece that detaches on." They were going through this stuff, and he was sitting there thinking, "I know what a wrench is. I know what a wrench is." But he told me, he says, "Gary, when I got a month into this, they stood up there and they said, this is a fuel nozzle. It has to be so many milligrams, or it has to, they give you these exacting measurements in millimeters and micrometers, or whatever the term they were using, so that you can have a jet spray of, a spray of fuel that's in a perfect cone and all this kind of stuff." And he said, "I had to start off with this as a wrench to get myself to there, because I knew nothing about that." And so you have to start wherever you're at. And you have to sometimes go back to even more basic than where you're at. Like, okay, this is a computer, but how do I plug it in before I can turn it on? What do I do for an alternate power source? How do I make sure I'm connected to the internet in my home, which sometimes the internet fails? Maybe they're working on the street. How can I tell the difference? And when I try to do something and suddenly my computer's not working, how do I troubleshoot and problem solve that? Because these are all the things and skills and habits that would be wonderful if you never had them as a problem. But as an entrepreneur you're going to learn how to deal with them if you've never dealt with them before. And central casting, someplace on planet Earth, central casting is going to send you a lesson. And when you learn that lesson, it will go away, but a new one will appear that seems to be a corollary or an adjunct or something to the previous lesson. And soon you'll be able to integrate 4 or 5 lessons. And as you go through this process, you know how to problem solve. You're growing as a person, and you're becoming better and more thorough and more prudent. Look, this has been Q&A for the Golden Nugget Nation today. My name is Gary Jenkins. It's been my pleasure to speak with you and to share with you a little bit about, grow wherever you're planted. Start wherever you're at right now. Don't delay, just do. Get clear about what you want, know what your why is, and let it drive you forward. Become fearless, become a fearless warrior for what you know, what you believe, what you desire. Doesn't mean you have to be mean or cruel. You can be gentle, you can be kind, you can be loving, but you have to know where you stand. You have to know what you stand for, because if you don't know that, you'll fall for everything. So just stand, grow where you're planted, because where you're at when you begin your journey is the perfect place for you, and life will give you the lessons. Be grateful for those lessons. They're hard. They're frustrating. They can get you so angry. And sometimes the lessons are just such a joyful experience because you're intrigued, you're fascinated, you move from one thing to the next. And at the end, you say, I can't believe I did that. I did that. I did this. I built a website. I put together a landing page and it worked. And people are responding to it. They're writing to me. I have to answer questions. I've created a sales funnel. I created a sales funnel. Yeah, you will. Grow where you're planted. And that's my words for you today. Thank you very much. Of course, next week will be the last Wednesday of the month of September. It'll be the 29th. I look forward to seeing you all there. Thank you for joining me in the Golden Nugget Nation. Have a great evening. Bye.